Sometimes the greatest strength comes from the darkest places. Sometimes a mother's love can survive anything, even 24 years buried alive beneath the cold, hard earth. In 1847, a 17-year-old girl named Martha Whitmore vanished from a wagon train crossing the Montana Territory. The official story was that she was taken by wolves. The truth was far, far worse. Martha was alive, trapped in a stone cellar beneath a remote mountain cabin. Her captor was a man named Silas McGraw, a hulking brute who had forgotten what it meant to be human. For over 2 decades, she survived in that underground prison. She gave birth to 9 children and raised them all by candlelight, teaching them to read, to hope, and to believe in a world they had never seen. Martha turned that cellar into a fortress of the human spirit. But what happens when the outside world finally comes, knocking on the door of that forgotten cabin? What happens when the truth of what lies beneath is finally unearthed? You won't believe what they found. The morning mist clung to the Missouri River like a ghost as the Whitmore family loaded their wagon. Martha, just 17, pressed her father's leather-bound Bible to her chest. Its worn edges felt like a promise of safety. She had a quiet beauty, the kind that made the older women nod in approval, and the young men stumble over their words. Her dark hair caught the early light, and her green eyes held a spark of pure, uncut hope for the journey west. "Martha, you keep that Bible safe," her father, Thomas, said. He'd sold their small farm back in Independence, Missouri, chasing a dream of rich Oregon soil. 2 failed corn crops had left them no choice. They were pioneers now, part of a great serpent of 37 families stretching along the riverbank, each wagon filled with little more than hope and desperation. The wagon master, Captain Ezra Morrison, was a weathered man with silver whiskers who'd made the crossing 6 times. He promised to get them to Oregon before the first snows. But some promises are made to be broken. Martha's younger brother Samuel helped secure the water barrels. Her mother Elizabeth moved with a quiet grace, packing their entire life into that small wooden space. Her grandmother's quilt, her husband's tools, seeds for a new life, and precious little else. "Stay close to the Morrison wagon," Elizabeth whispered to Martha. "The captain's wife, Sarah, says you read better than most school teachers back east." The compliment warmed Martha more than the sun. She loved books. The Bible wasn't just scripture to her. It was literature, history, poetry, and hope, all bound in cracked leather. As the wagon train lurched into motion, Martha walked alongside their ox, Samson. The big beast had cost them nearly everything they had left. The rhythm of hooves and wheels became the soundtrack of their lives. The first weeks were a blur of mundane hardship, broken wheels, sick animals, the constant, choking dust. Martha made herself useful, tending to the sick children, reading to them from her Bible. She earned the respect of the older women, who saw she was more than just a pretty face. But during the 3rd week, as they approached the Platte River crossing, she heard a new name whispered around the evening fires. A name spoken like a curse: Silas McGraw. Captain Morrison only said the name when he thought the women weren't listening. McGraw was a mountain man, they said, who'd claimed a piece of the high country in what would one day be Montana. He trapped beaver and hunted elk, but darker stories followed him down from the peaks. "Man's been alone too long," an old-timer named Ben Tucker muttered, spitting into the fire. "Ain't natural. It changes a man's mind, makes him forget he's human." Martha leaned closer, her sewing forgotten. "Heard tell he's taken Indian wives," Morrison said, his voice a low rumble. "Some say he's killed travelers foolish enough to cross his territory. The army won't go after him. Too remote, too dangerous." Thomas Whitmore shifted on his log seat. "We won't be going anywhere near his territory, will we, Captain?" "Not if I can help it," Morrison replied, studying his worn maps. "But the passes are treacherous. Weather can force a man to take routes he'd rather avoid." He looked up from the map, his face grim in the firelight. "Just pray we don't have cause to find out what kind of man Silas McGraw really is." Martha's fingers found her Bible again. Something cold settled in her stomach. It wasn't fear. It was something her grandmother called the knowing. A whisper of warning she couldn't yet understand. The storm hit on a Tuesday evening in late August. It came with no warning. Black clouds boiled over the peaks, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes. Captain Morrison ordered the wagons into a circle. but it was too late. The rain came down in sheets, turning the ground to a river of mud. Martha hugged her Bible as the wind howled. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the mountainsides in terrifying detail. One wrong step could send you tumbling hundreds of feet into the darkness. "Stay in the wagon!" her father shouted, but the wind stole his words. It was during the storm's worst fury that Martha first saw him, a figure moving through the rain with impossible stealth. Lightning flashed, and there he was, a massive man wrapped in animal skins, moving between the wagons like a wolf studying a herd of sheep. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was no member of their party. She tried to scream, but the sight of him froze the sound in her throat. He wasn't just watching, he was hunting, and he wasn't hunting animals. When morning came, the storm had passed, and Martha wondered if she had imagined him. But deep in her soul, where the knowing lived, she understood. Their journey west had just taken a very, very dark turn. The abduction happened in the chaos of breaking camp. A wagon was stuck axle deep in mud, and the men were shouting and working to free it. Martha volunteered to gather kindling from the forest's edge. The air smelled of wet pine and fresh earth. She was humming a hymn when the hand clamped over her mouth. The smell hit her first. Animal grease, unwashed skin, and something metallic, like old blood. Before she could react, iron-strong arms lifted her off the ground as easily as if she were a doll. Her scream died against the calloused palm. Her father's Bible tumbled from her hands, falling open in the wet leaves. Silas McGraw carried her deeper into the forest. She caught one last glimpse of the familiar pages, the gold lettering catching a stray sunbeam, before the trees swallowed them whole. He moved through the wilderness with a predator's grace. Martha fought, clawing at his face, biting the hand that silenced her. But he was as immovable as the mountains themselves. Her terror gave way to a desperate calculation. She tried to memorize landmarks, a lightning-split pine, a boulder shaped like a sleeping bear. If she could escape, she would need to find her way back. But the hours blurred together as they climbed higher and higher into country no wagon could ever reach. Hope began to fade. Silas McGraw knew these mountains like the back of his hand. Every step he took was a step further away from her world, from her family, from everything she had ever known. When he finally set her down, they stood before a cabin that seemed to grow out of the mountainside itself. It was built of massive logs chinked with mud and moss, blending in so perfectly you could walk right past it. Smoke drifted from a stone chimney. Animal pelts hung from the eaves like grotesque decorations. "Don't run," McGraw spoke for the first time. His voice was like gravel grinding against stone. "Nowhere to go but down, and it's a long fall." He was right. The cabin perched on a narrow ledge with sheer drops on three sides. The only way in was the path they had just climbed. He pushed open the cabin door. The smell that hit her was the smell of decay. Animal bones were scattered on rough tables. Pelts hung from the rafters. It was the home of a man who had forgotten how to live among people. "This way," he grunted. He led her to a root-cellar door set into the floor. Martha's heart hammered as he lifted the heavy wooden panel. A set of stone steps descended into absolute darkness. The smell that rose from below was damp earth and long confinement. "No," she whispered. "Please, no." But his massive hand on her shoulder gave her no choice. "Down!" The steps were slick with moisture. At the bottom, McGraw lit an oil lamp. The cellar was larger than she expected, maybe 20 feet long and 15 wide. The walls were natural stone, part of the mountain itself. The floor was hard-packed earth covered with moldy straw. A crude bed of pine boughs sat in one corner. The air was thick, stale, suffocating. "This is home now," McGraw said, setting the lamp on a stone ledge. "You try to leave, you die. You scream too much, you wish you were dead. You do what I say when I say it, and maybe you live long enough to appreciate what I've given you." "My family will look for me," she said, her voice trembling. "The wagon train." McGraw let out a laugh that had no humor in it. "Your family thinks you're dead. Probably found wolf tracks near where I took you. Happens all the time out here. Ain't nobody coming for you, girl. Sooner you understand that, the easier this gets." He climbed the steps. Martha heard the heavy thud of the cellar door closing, then the scrape of something heavy being dragged across it. Then his footsteps faded as he walked away. Darkness swallowed her whole. Absolute darkness. She sank to the floor, her legs giving out. The silence was total. No wind, no birds, just the sound of her own ragged breathing and the steady drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the black. She thought of her father's Bible, lying open in the forest. By now the rain would have soaked its pages, the ink running, the binding warped beyond repair. It felt like losing everything all over again. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time had no meaning in the dark. McGraw brought food, hard bread, dried meat, water in a tin cup. He never stayed long, never spoke except to give a harsh command. She explored her prison by touch, her hands tracing every inch of the stone walls. There were no weak spots, no loose stones. This cellar hadn't just been built for storage. It had been designed to hold someone. And as her fingers traced the cold, hard rock, she found something that made her blood run cold. Scratches in the stone, faint but unmistakable. Not words, but simple marks. A calendar. Someone had been here before her. Someone had been counting the days. The realization that she was not McGraw's first victim brought a fresh wave of terror. This wasn't just a prison. It was a tomb waiting to be filled. On what she thought was the fourth day, something inside her shifted. Despair gave way to a cold, hard resolve. She remembered her grandmother's words about the strength that lives in women, the power to endure the impossible. She began to count her own breaths, one, then another. If she was going to survive, she needed to hold on to who she was. She needed to fight back, not with her fists, but with her mind. The next time McGraw descended with her meager meal, she was sitting up straight. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice clear in the darkness. He paused, surprised. "What does it matter?" "Because I'm going to be here for a while, it seems," she said, "and you're the only person I have to talk to." Something flickered in his eyes. Not kindness, but maybe a glimmer of recognition that the crushing isolation was affecting him too. "Silas," he said finally. "Silas McGraw." "I'm Martha Whitmore," she replied. He grunted and turned to leave. "How long have you been up here, Silas?" she pressed. "Long enough to know that talk don't change nothing." But he had answered. He had given her a piece of himself. And Martha filed that small victory away. She would learn everything about this monster. She would find his weaknesses, his fears, and someday she would use that knowledge to escape. Her first escape attempt failed. She was fast, but he was faster. He had underestimated her intelligence, and she had underestimated his animal cunning. He caught her just before the tree line. The iron shackles he brought back were old but strong. He chained her ankle to an iron ring set deep in the stone wall. The chain was long enough for her to move around the cellar, but not long enough to reach the stairs. As he secured the heavy lock, she saw something in his eyes that chilled her more than anything before. It wasn't anger, it was satisfaction. "Now we understand each other," he said. But Martha understood something too. The shackles weren't just punishment. They were a sign. Whatever future McGraw had planned for her, it was permanent. There would be no rescue, no reprieve. As winter settled over the mountains, burying the world in snow, Martha felt the first fluttering movements in her belly. And she knew, with absolute certainty, her ordeal was only just beginning. 5 years had passed. 5 years in the dark. The cellar that was once a tomb had become a home, a school, a nursery. 3 small faces now looked to her for everything. Benjamin, her eldest at 4, had his mother's green eyes and a terrifying intelligence. He had never seen sunlight, but he could recite Bible verses from memory. His questions were relentless. "What is blue, Mama? Why do the walls cry? When will Papa Silas take us to see the sky?" That last question was a knife in her heart. Benjamin had no idea that Silas McGraw wasn't his father. He was his jailer. Martha had made the agonizing choice to shield them with a lie. The truth was a burden too heavy for their small shoulders. 2-year-old Sarah had been born during a blizzard so fierce even McGraw couldn't leave the cabin. Martha had delivered her daughter alone, in the dark, guided only by instinct and prayer. Sarah was quiet, watchful. She rarely cried, as if she understood that tears were a luxury they couldn't afford. Baby Ruth was just 8 months old. Her presence had forced Martha to become even more resourceful. 3 children meant carefully managing every crumb of food, every inch of space, every single sound. McGraw's tolerance had its limits. Martha had learned to read his moods like a sailor reads the weather. She knew his footsteps overhead. The children did too. They would cluster around her when they heard the heavy scrape of the cellar door. Teaching blocks, Martha whispered to Benjamin as they heard McGraw's boots cross the cabin floor. She had painstakingly carved the blocks from scraps of wood, scratching letters onto them with a nail. The set was incomplete, only 12 letters, but it was enough. M for Mama, Benjamin whispered, holding up a block. S for Sarah. Martha's heart swelled with pride and shattered all at once. Her son was a genius, trapped in a stone box. What good were letters if he would never read a book? The cellar door creaked open. Lamplight spilled down the steps. McGraw's presence filled the small space, sucking the air out of it. The children are too loud, he said, his voice flat. Heard them laughing yesterday. Sound carries in these mountains. Martha pulled her children closer. They're just children, Silas. Children laugh. Not these children, he said, his eyes as cold as a frozen lake. Not anymore. They need to understand what happens to children who make noise. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She had seen his rage before. She had felt his strength. But threatening her children, that was a line. They'll be quiet, she said, her voice a steel rod. I'll make sure of it. McGraw studied her, maybe seeing something new in her eyes. See that you do. I got business coming up. It requires silence. Absolute silence. After he left, Martha gathered her children. They were going to play a new game. A game called Quiet as Mice. Their lives depended on it. The teaching blocks became more than just tools for learning. They became tools for survival. B meant be still. Q meant quiet. D meant danger. They learned to speak with their hands, their eyes. A secret language for a secret family. She allowed herself to dream of escape. She had mapped every inch of their prison in her mind. But with 3 small children, one still nursing, it was a suicide mission. So she focused on what she could control. She organized the cellar, a sleeping corner, a washing area, a latrine. She taught them songs in whispers. She told them stories of a world above, edited for their protection. She taught them about love. Every night she held each child and told them they were precious, that they were loved beyond measure. She created birthdays, celebrations, marking time in a place where time stood still. McGraw's business turned out to be a bloody dispute with another trapper. For 3 weeks, he was gone. Martha rationed their food and water, praying he would return. Because if he didn't, they would die slowly, together, in the dark. When he finally came back, he was different. More paranoid, more suspicious. He spoke of government men asking questions in the valley, of railroad surveyors mapping the mountains. Times are changing, he muttered. Too many people coming west. A man can't live as he pleases anymore. Martha filed the information away. Change. Civilization was creeping closer, and with it, a sliver of impossible hope. But for now, survival meant teaching her children to be invisible, to find joy in whispered songs and pride in wooden letters. As Benjamin traced words in the dirt floor by lamplight, Martha felt a fierce surge of determination. Her children would survive. They would be ready, letter by letter, lesson by lesson, day by silent day. 10 years. 10 years had transformed Martha. The cellar now housed 6 children. What was once a simple prison was now a complex underground world, organized with the precision of a desperate genius. 9-year-old Benjamin was a serious boy who understood too much. His questions were sharper now. Mama, why don't we ever see the sun? Why is Papa Silas so angry? What's really beyond the walls? Martha had started a secret journal, scratched onto pieces of birch bark with a sharpened nail. She recorded the children's development, Bible verses, and McGraw's patterns. The journal kept her sane. It was proof that she was still Martha Whitmore, not just a prisoner. 7-year-old Sarah was her lieutenant. She had an intuition that was almost supernatural. She could sense Monroe's moods before he even reached the cellar door. 5-year-old Ruth was the dreamer. She begged for stories of the world above, of flowers and birds and open sky. 3-year-old Mary was the quiet observer. She collected small treasures, pebbles, bits of metal, that Martha used for counting lessons. Baby Isaac, just learning to walk, was a constant source of joy and terror. His babbling couldn't be silenced. His cries couldn't be explained away as the wind. 6-month-old Grace slept against Martha's chest, a tiny fragile reason to keep fighting. The teaching system had evolved. She taught math with pebbles, geography from her memories of the journey west. But the most important lessons were about survival. They had a silent communication system so subtle it was like they could read each other's minds. A closed fist meant absolute silence. An open palm meant whispered conversation was allowed. A pointed finger meant danger. The cellar itself was a marvel of organization. A sleeping zone, a washing zone, a learning corner. She had even created a calendar, scratching marks into the stone wall. A decade of survival etched in stone. Her secret journal grew. Benjamin asked today why we live like this. One entry read, I lied again. Told him Papa Silas keeps us safe. The lies are getting harder. He's too smart. Soon I'll have to choose between the truth and his safety. Monroe's visits were a grim routine. He brought food. He checked on the children like a farmer examining livestock. And he demanded things from Martha that left her feeling hollowed out. She endured it. For them. Benjamin watched the interactions between them with growing confusion. Why does Papa Silas never hug us like you do? Sarah asked one day. The question was a dagger. Some fathers show love differently, Martha said, the lie tasting like ash. He shows his love by keeping us safe. How could she tell them? How could she explain they were prisoners, that the man they called father was their captor? Instead, she poured everything into them. She built their minds, their spirits. She taught them they were valuable, that they were loved. She began to tell them stories about communities, about schools and churches, about people helping each other. Someday, she told them, you'll see all of these things. When that day comes, you'll be ready. Benjamin's eyes lit up. When, Mama? When is someday? That night, Martha wrote in her journal, I don't know when, my sweet boy, but I promise you, someday will come. It has to. Winter settled over the mountains again. Martha looked at her 6 children. They were getting stronger, smarter, but they were growing up in a place where innocence was a liability. The journal would continue to grow, one piece of bark at a time. It held their history and their hope, because Martha Whitmore refused to believe that this underground world was all her children would ever know. 15 years. 15 years buried alive. The calendar on the wall bore over 5,000 scratches, each one a victory. 8 children now called her mother. The oldest, Benjamin, was 14. The youngest, Paul, was just 3 months old. The cellar was a fortress of the human spirit. The learning corner housed materials that would have impressed scholars back east. The storage areas were managed with the precision of a quartermaster preparing for a siege. Benjamin had crossed the threshold into manhood, and with it came questions Martha could no longer deflect. Mama, he said one evening, his voice low and serious, I've been counting. Martha's heart skipped. Counting what? Days, seasons, years, he said. I've lived my entire life in this room. The stories you tell about other children, other families. They're real, aren't they? There really is a world above us. The moment she had dreaded for years had arrived. She looked into her son's face and saw her father's honesty, her mother's strength. Yes, she whispered, there is. The admission hung between them. Benjamin's expression shifted from shock to anger to a strange kind of relief. Then why? He started. Because the truth is dangerous, Benjamin, she cut him off. More dangerous than you can imagine. But it was too late. 12-year-old Sarah had been listening. I've known for a while, she said simply. The way you watch the ceiling when he's up there, the way you flinch. He's not really our father, is he? The walls of protection Martha had built were crumbling. 10-year-old Ruth sat up, tears streaming down her face. I don't understand. If there's a world above us, why can't we go there? Why do we have to stay in the dark? The question shattered Martha's heart. How could she explain that the man they called father was their jailer? Because it's not safe, she said. It was the same lie, but now it felt thin as paper. He keeps us here to protect us. Benjamin's eyes narrowed. Protect us from what? Martha looked at her 8 children, her greatest achievement and her deepest sorrow. From people who might hurt you, she said. It was a half-truth. But you came from above, Benjamin pressed. You've seen the sun. Why can't we? The calendar scratches mocked her. 15 years of lies. Because I was older when I came here, she said, her voice shaking. I was prepared. You need more time to grow strong. How much more time, Mama? 8-year-old Mary asked. The question was a physical blow. I don't know, Martha admitted, the honesty raw and terrifying. But I promise you this. When the time is right, you'll see everything. The sky, the trees, the rivers, all of it. You promise? Benjamin asked, his eyes burning into hers. I promise. It was a vow that terrified her. But seeing the hope ignite in her children's eyes, she knew she would find a way. Or die trying. The revelation changed everything. The older children started asking different questions. Benjamin wanted to know about tools, weapons, survival skills. Sarah questioned the stories, separating fact from fiction. Ruth began to draw pictures of the sun and sky, creating art from a world she'd only ever dreamed of. They started using the teaching blocks to spell out questions too dangerous to speak. When will we leave? Is Papa Silas bad? McGraw's behavior was growing more erratic. He spoke of government men, of railroad surveyors, of new settlements. Too many people, he'd mutter, his eyes scanning the children with a cold calculation. Too many questions. Martha knew change was coming. The question was whether it would be salvation or destruction. She looked at her children that night. Survival was no longer enough. They needed to be prepared, not just to live, but to fight. She touched the latest mark on the wall. Day 475. Someday was coming, and when it did, they would be ready. 20 years. The woman who survived day after day in the dark bore little resemblance to the 17-year-old girl with dreams of Oregon. 9 children now filled the cellar. The oldest, Benjamin, was a young man of 15. The youngest, Anna, was just 6 weeks old. The underground world had reached its breaking point. She had started making woven grass dolls for the children. They were more than toys. They were a way to preserve a sliver of childhood in a place where innocence could get you killed. Each doll had a name, a personality. Through the dolls, the children could express feelings that were too dangerous to say out loud. Benjamin was nearly as tall as McGraw now. His intelligence burned with an intensity that frightened Martha. Mama, he said one evening, as they tried to find space for 9 bodies to sleep. How long can this continue? How long before something breaks? 13-year-old Sarah, ever watchful, added, The baby cries more, and Papa Silas has been coming down more often. He's watching us differently. She was right. McGraw's visits had changed. He studied the children with cold, calculating eyes. He paid special attention to Benjamin's growing size. 11-year-old Ruth's stories had turned darker. Tales of children trapped in towers, of heroes fighting against impossible odds. 9-year-old Mary, the quiet organizer, had started asking questions about the world above that were sharp and probing. They were all changing, growing, and their prison was shrinking. Tell us about the doll who went outside, Ruth whispered one evening, clutching a doll made from a precious scrap of blue fabric. Once upon a time, Martha began, her throat tight, there was a brave doll who lived underground. She loved her family, but she dreamed of seeing the sun. Did she ever see it? Isaac asked. She had to wait for the right time, Martha said. But yes, eventually she saw the sun, and it was more beautiful than she had ever imagined. Benjamin listened, understanding the story was not about a doll. He knew most of the truth now. Martha could see it in the way he watched McGraw, the protective way he stood between the younger children and their captor. The space problem was critical. 9 people could not live in a cellar built for 1 prisoner. McGraw knew it too. His solution filled Martha with a cold dread. Too many mouths, he had muttered on his last visit. Getting too crowded. Pretty soon, people are going to notice things they shouldn't. Martha understood the threat. As her children grew, secrecy became impossible. Their voices, their movements, their very existence was a risk to McGraw's isolation. She started teaching them practical survival skills, disguised as games. But Benjamin and Sarah knew. "We need to be ready," Benjamin said one night. "Ready for what?" Martha asked, her heart pounding. "To leave," he said simply. "To fight. To survive above ground if we have to." The idea was terrifying. For 20 years, her goal had been to keep them hidden, to keep them safe. But Benjamin was right. Change was coming. "Papa Silas is scared," Sarah said quietly. "He talks about government men and railroad people. He's afraid they'll find us." "Is that bad?" Ruth asked. "Change can be dangerous," Martha said carefully, "but it can also bring opportunities." The calendar on the wall had become a countdown to an unknown future. As Martha settled baby Anna for the night, she looked at her 8 other children. Survival was no longer enough. Her children deserved more than just to exist. They deserved to live. Tomorrow would be day 7,301 of their captivity. But Martha was beginning to believe it might also be the beginning of their liberation. The surveyor's map changed everything. It was beautiful and terrifying. A piece of the outside world, crisp and official, laid out on their dirt floor. McGraw had thrown it down in a rage. "Government surveyors," he spat, "mapping every acre from here to the capital. Seems this mountain sits right in the path of their precious railroad." Martha's heart hammered. After 24 years, the world had found them. Not through rescue, but through the relentless march of progress. Benjamin stepped forward to read the map. "This says the land belongs to the territorial government," he said quietly. "Anyone claiming residence has to file ownership papers." McGraw's hand cracked across Benjamin's face. A shocking, brutal slap. "Don't you read what ain't your business, boy?" Martha moved to shield her son, but Benjamin stood his ground, blood trickling from his lip, his eyes locked on McGraw's. In that moment, her boy became a man who would not back down. "Easy, Silas," Martha said, her voice a calm surface on a sea of terror. "He was just trying to understand." "What's happening?" McGraw snarled, pacing like a caged bear. "Is that 24 years of living as I please is about to end. Government men with badges and papers think they can come into my territory and tell me what to do." He gestured around the cellar. "And soon this whole mountain will be crawling with people asking questions I don't want to answer. Questions about a missing girl from a wagon train. Questions about children who had no official record of being born." "What does this mean for us?" Martha asked, already knowing the answer. McGraw's eyes moved from child to child. "It means things are going to change. Can't have 9 people living down here when government men start poking around. Too much noise, too much risk, too much evidence." The threat was clear. He was considering murder. Not out of passion, but as a practical solution to a logistical problem. "There are other solutions," she said. "We could move deeper into the mountains." He laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "With 9 children, half of them can barely walk. You think we can just pack up and disappear?" "Or you could let us go," Benjamin said, his voice ringing in the sudden silence. The suggestion was so audacious, so impossible, it shocked even McGraw. He stared at Benjamin, a flicker of something like admiration in his eyes. "Let you go where, boy? You think you can just walk down this mountain and join society? You think anyone would believe your story? That your mama bore 9 children to the man who kept her prisoner?" He was right. Release meant exposure, investigation, and consequences that could destroy them all. But the alternative was unthinkable. "There's a third option," McGraw said, his voice a menacing whisper. "Could be that Martha Whitmore and her children died in a tragic accident. Mountain winters are hard. Sometimes whole families just disappear." The children huddled together, a silent, terrified mass. "You won't hurt them," Martha said, her voice shaking but firm. "Whatever happens to me, you will not hurt my children." "Your children," McGraw sneered. "These are my children, Martha, born on my land, raised under my roof. By any law that matters, They belong to me. Benjamin's hands clenched into fists. He was ready to fight, ready to die. Martha saw it, and so did McGraw. Benjamin, no, she whispered. The boy reluctantly stood down. The boy's got spirit, McGraw mused. Might be useful to keep one or two of the older ones. The rest? He shrugged as if discussing livestock. The map lay on the floor, a symbol of the world crashing in on them. For 24 years, Martha had focused on survival, but now that was no longer an option. How long, she asked. How long before the railroad crews arrive? Surveyors said next spring, McGraw said. Could be sooner, which means decisions need to be made. Soon. After he left, Martha gathered her children. Mama, Ruth whispered, are we in danger? Martha looked at her daughter's innocent face and chose the hard truth. Yes, sweetheart, we are. Then we need to do something, Benjamin said, his voice filled with a new authority. We need a plan. What can we do? Sarah asked when we're trapped. We know what Mom has taught us, Mary said. We know how to read and write and think. We know how to survive. But do we know how to fight? Isaac asked. Martha looked at her children, her life's work, her army. We're going to learn, she said. We're going to learn everything we need to survive what's coming, because one way or another, our life in this cellar is ending. And when it does, we're going to be ready. The sharpened bone tools were hidden all over the cellar. Chicken bones filed to razor points, deer ribs shaped into daggers, a wolf's femur that Benjamin had carved into a brutal club. For 3 weeks, they had been preparing for war. McGraw's visits were more erratic, more dangerous. He talked about cleaning up loose ends. There was no doubt what he meant. Show me again, Martha whispered to Benjamin. In the flickering lamplight, they practiced their desperate choreography. At 16, Benjamin was strong, fast. But McGraw was a monster. Sarah, your position, Martha ordered. Sarah, their strategist, would guard the younger children. 12-year-old Ruth was the lookout. Her sharp whistle would be their only warning. They had turned their prison into a battlefield. Every shadow, every pile of straw was part of the plan. 10-year-old Mary had used her mathematical mind to calculate angles of attack. 8-year-old Isaac would keep the little ones quiet, no matter what. Martha looked at her army of children, and her heart broke. They had never played in fields. Instead, they had learned to be warriors. Listen to me, she said, gathering them close. What we are planning is dangerous. Some of us might not survive. But if we do nothing, none of us will. He has decided we are too much of a risk to keep alive. How can you be sure? Benjamin asked, his jaw tight. Because I have watched him for 24 years, she said. I know how he thinks. We have become a problem he can no longer ignore. These bone weapons won't be enough if he has a gun, Sarah said. He won't bring a gun in here, Martha replied with certainty. Too much risk of a ricochet, too much noise. He will come down here planning to use his hands, maybe a knife. He will expect us to cower. Instead, we fight. The emotional preparation was the hardest. Martha studied each of their faces, memorizing them. Benjamin's serious eyes, Sarah's gentle smile that could turn fierce in an instant, Ruth's artistic hands that had made beauty out of nothing. Whatever happens, she told them, you are not victims. You are survivors. You are fighters. You are my children, and you are stronger than any mountain, any prison, any man who thinks he owns you. Mary had written a letter on a piece of birch bark, addressed to the outside world. In case we don't all make it, she explained, someone should know we were here. Someone should know we fought. The letter told their story. It was a testament to their resilience, their humanity, and their mother's fierce love. The bone weapons were supplemented with sharp stones, heavy logs, lengths of rope. Their greatest weapon, though, was something McGraw could never anticipate. 24 years of unity, forged in the crucible of shared suffering. They moved as one organism, communicating with a glance, a gesture. They were a family. They were a pack. Remember, Martha said on what might be their last night together. We are fighting for our lives. We are fighting for our freedom. We are fighting for the chance to see the sun. The calendar on the wall had reached 8,195 marks, nearly 24 years. Martha touched the latest scratch and whispered a prayer. Tomorrow, she said, our old life ends. Whatever comes after, freedom or death, it will be ours to choose. Baby Anna slept peacefully in her arms, but the older children lay awake, their hands on their hidden weapons. They had been victims for long enough. Tomorrow they would be free, or they would die trying. The key had hung from Monroe's belt for 24 years, a symbol of her captivity. Now, as he descended the stone steps with murder in his eyes, the key caught the lamplight like a star. Time to settle accounts, he said, his voice flat. Behind him, the cellar door was open. A rectangle of pale morning light stung Martha's eyes. It was now or never. Benjamin moved first. He launched himself from the shadows, the sharpened wolf bone aimed at Monroe's throat. Surprise was on their side. For a single, precious second. Monroe stumbled back, but his reflexes were like lightning. He caught Benjamin's wrist, sending the boy crashing against the stone wall. You taught them to fight, Monroe laughed, a genuinely amused sound. You have been busy, Martha. Martha stepped into the light. Her own weapon, a sharpened deer rib, held steady. You taught me that everything worth having must be fought for. Fair enough, Monroe said, pulling the long skinning knife from his belt. But you forgot one thing. I've been killing since before your oldest boy was born. The battle exploded. Sarah attacked his legs. Ruth whistled the danger signal. Mary threw stones with deadly precision. But Monroe was a giant, a killer. His fist sent Sarah doubling over in pain. His boots sent Ruth tumbling. Even wounded and surrounded, he fought with the fury of a cornered beast. Martha pressed her attack, her bone weapon finding his thigh. He roared in pain, and his knife swung in a deadly arc, slicing across her shoulder. You should have been grateful, he snarled. I gave you a life. You gave me nothing, she screamed, her weapon finding its mark again. You stole everything. Benjamin was on his feet again, launching himself at Monroe, trying to bring the giant down. The cellar was a whirlwind of desperate violence, but they were losing. Monroe's knife had cut Benjamin's arm, Ruth's back. Their bone weapons were no match for his steel. Enough, Monroe roared. He grabbed Benjamin by the throat, lifting him off the ground. You want to watch them die, Martha? You want to watch them bleed out on this floor? The threat froze them. Benjamin's feet kicked uselessly, and then Martha heard it. Voices, from above, carried on the wind through the open cellar door. Tracks lead this way. Cabin looks abandoned, but we should check it thoroughly. Territorial marshal's orders. Monroe heard them too. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. The railroad survey had brought the law to his doorstep. Let him go, Martha said, her voice quiet, but filled with a new authority. Let him go, or I scream. Those men will hear me, Silas. They will come. You think they'll believe you? He hissed, his grip still tight on Benjamin's throat. A mad woman and her bastard children? I think they'll investigate, she said. I think they'll ask questions. And I think you know what happens to men who keep women prisoner for 24 years. The voices were closer now, boots on the cabin floor above them. Check that root cellar, a voice called. Discovery was moments away. Monroe's eyes darted between Martha and the stairs. His grip on Benjamin loosened. This isn't over, he growled. Yes, Martha said, a smile spreading across her face for the first time in years. A smile of pure, cold victory. It is. The key on his belt swung gently. The voices were at the top of the stairs. They're coming, Silas, she said. And when they get here, this key is going to unlock more than just a door. Her torn dress, the same blue calico she wore the day she was taken, told the story of 24 years of survival. As the territorial marshals descended the stairs, their lanterns blazing, the dress seemed to glow with vindication. Jesus Christ, whispered Marshal Tom Bradley, a man who thought he'd seen everything. Ma'am, are you all right? Martha looked up at the first new face in over 2 decades, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Sunlight streamed through the open door, a golden, impossible river. Tears streamed down her face. 9 children, she finally managed, her voice cracking. I have 9 children down here. Deputy Jake Morrison was already slapping iron shackles on Monroe, who stood in stunned surrender. The giant of the mountains seemed to shrink in the presence of the law. Martha watched as the chains closed around his wrists, the same kind he had used on her. Her children emerged slowly from the shadows, blinking in the new light. "Ma'am," Marshal Bradley said gently, "can you tell me your name?" "Martha Whitmore," she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "I was taken from a wagon train 24 years ago. These are my children, all of them born here." Benjamin stepped forward, his pale skin a testament to a life lived in darkness. "Are we really free?" he asked. "You're free, son," the marshal confirmed. "All of you." The words echoed in the small stone room, but freedom was overwhelming. Baby Anna cried at the strange voices. Grace hid behind Sarah's skirts. Martha looked at McGraw one last time. For 24 years, he had been her entire world. Her captor, her tormentor. Now he was just a criminal. "Wait," she said. He turned. She saw not a monster, but a broken man. "The key," she said simply. His bound hands fumbled at his belt. He held it out to her. Their fingers brushed. Captor and captive. Destroyer and survivor. One last touch. Then he was gone, led away by the law. Martha turned to her children. "Come," she said, her voice filled with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "It's time to see the sun." They climbed the steps, ascending from the grave into life. When they stepped out of the cabin, the world exploded in color and light. The sky was a blue so vast it made her dizzy. Pine forests stretched to snow-capped peaks. Her children stood frozen, their faces turned up to the sun they had only ever dreamed of. "It's so big," Ruth whispered, her artist's eyes drinking in the colors. Isaac laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. He ran in circles on the grass, his arms spread wide. The sight of her child running free under an open sky broke something inside Martha. She sobbed with a relief so profound it felt like drowning. "What happens now, Mama?" Sarah asked. Martha looked at her torn dress, at her 9 children blinking in the sunlight, at the vast open world before them. 24 years of captivity had ended. The challenge of freedom was just beginning. The new family photograph was taken 6 months later in Helena. Martha barely recognized herself. The silver in her hair, the peace in her eyes. Benjamin had grown 3 inches. Sarah had blossomed. They had a small rented house, a new life. "Do you ever miss it?" Benjamin asked her one evening. "The certainty?" "I miss the simplicity," she admitted. "But I don't miss the cage." They were different, and the townspeople sometimes stared. But different didn't mean damaged. Ruth discovered a talent for painting, capturing sunsets she had never seen with an accuracy that stunned her teachers. Mary devoured mathematics textbooks. Isaac's humor flourished. The youngest children, with no memory of the cellar, adapted as if they had been born to this world of light and air. The legal proceedings against McGraw ended with a life sentence. Martha spoke at the trial. "He stole 24 years of my life," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But he could not steal our humanity. He could not steal our love. We are not victims. We are survivors." The wooden teaching blocks she had carved in the dark now sat on the mantelpiece in their new home, a symbol of hope triumphing over despair. "Education saved us," Martha would tell visitors. "It gave us the strength to believe in freedom before we ever saw the sun." The photograph hung in their parlor for decades, a testament to survival, to love, to the unbreakable bonds forged in darkness. It captured a truth Martha knew in her bones. Strength hadn't emerged from suffering. It had been built day by day, lesson by lesson, in the conscious choice to remain human when everything tried to make them less. They had emerged from the darkness carrying a light, and that light would guide them forever. They were the Whitmore family, and they were finally, completely, eternally free. What an incredible story of resilience. If you were moved by Martha's story and the strength of her family, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because the stories we share here are a reminder that even in the darkest of places, the human spirit can shine its brightest.